So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about implementing specifications grading in two different ecology classes that I've taught. Okay, so the first was E106, which is Processes in Ecology and Evolution. This is an upper division undergraduate course, mostly seniors, honestly, but I do get a few juniors in there as well. It has about 100 students in the class. This particular time when I implemented specs grading, it was last winter. So we had started on Zoom, and then I did a poll, anonymous polling of the students, and found that a lot of the students were having a lot of anxiety about coming back in person once we were allowed to. And so we ended up just staying on Zoom. So I did the teaching remotely and via Canvas. And then I took what I learned from that course, made some revisions in my specs grading approach, and I'm doing it again now in a class I'm teaching called Chemical Ecology. This is, again, an upper division undergraduate course, but it's a little smaller, 50 students. It's taught in person in an active learning classroom. So I have one of these classrooms that has students seated in pods, and they have their own screens. They can share, what they're working on with one another. But I do still heavily rely on Canvas. If I have a little time, I'll show you my Canvas page and how I have that set up. So here's how I redesigned the course and sort of implemented specs grading. So I have a list. This is for my chemical ecology course. I only really had time to show you one because I think my presentation is supposed to be only about, I actually forget, like 5 minutes. So I'll try to go quickly. So I have multiple assessments. I give the students weekly homework sets. Each of these homework sets is tied to particular learning objectives. I do these weekly reflections that are posted on Canvas. I've always done these. I find these really helpful just for me to find any sort of muddiest points, right? Areas where there's a lot of misunderstanding. So I can go back and address that. These weekly reflections, I give them a generic prompt that's the same every week. It's just, what did we learn about or talk about in class today or this week that, you found particularly interesting, or connects to another class you've had, or connects to current events in some way. And then they need to respond to two of their peers' posts as well. And I really enjoy reading through those, actually. And even with 100 students, I can flip through those pretty quickly. And they just get a complete or incomplete. They either did it or they didn't. Then I also have found that students really appreciate, I do a lot of group discussion work or like group activity work. And I realized the students were having a hard time kind of structuring their notes when they're doing that kind of work. So I ended up creating just all of the prompts I use for the activity or the questions. I just copy and paste them from my slides onto a Word document and give it to them, and they love it. Like, it helps structure it for them a little bit better. So I do that, and that's essentially how I end up assessing participation, if you will. If they're in class and completing the worksheets, then I know they were engaged. And then the big assessment at the end of not even at the end of the course, the biggest assessment I use to determine their grade is this data analysis project. And based on what I learned in E106, I revised how I implement this data analysis component to my class. So in E106, I had given them some data sets that I found on data repositories and asked them, like, here's a data set, come up with a question that you're interested in and use this data set to answer that question. And I ended up finding, like, the students really struggle with these kinds of creative tasks. You can tell that they've often been asked just to follow instructions. And so having to like step back and be more creative is quite a struggle for them. So what I did this quarter is I split this data analysis project into 3 components. They have to submit a proposal to me so that I can make sure they're starting out in a direction that's at least has the potential to be successful. And so they submit a rough draft of a data analysis proposal to me. I give them feedback on Canvas via a rubric, and then they can revise and resubmit. And that doesn't cost them any. There's like no what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're actually required to submit a rough draft in order to submit their final draft. I want them to get that feedback from me. It doesn't cost them any tokens or anything. I'll talk about tokens later to submit that revision. Same thing with the data analysis report. So they conduct their analysis and then write up a report. They are required to submit a rough draft to me first. I provide feedback, and then they submit their final report after a revision. And I talk to them about this. I'm very transparent with them that like I'm doing this because this is the way we actually do science, right? When I submit a grant proposal or I submit a paper, I get reviews and I revise it and I resubmit it. Like this is how it works. And I think that really helps me get some buy-in. And it also shows them that, you know, making mistakes isn't a bad thing. And I talk to them about this, like that's actually how you learn. You make the mistakes, I give you feedback, you revise it. Like that's the best way for you to learn. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. So allowing for some risks there and some risk taking. And then finally, there's a presentation. And so the way their grade is divvied up is as is shown here. So they have to master 9 or more of their homework sets. They have to master their proposal and their report, and they have to master their presentation to get an A. So it's a pretty high bar for an A, but there's a lot of opportunity to revise and resubmit to earn mastery. And then B's and C's and D's are distributed as is shown here. This quarter, as opposed to last quarter, I did also implement for this bigger project, instead of it just being mastery or not mastery, I have mastery, partial mastery, no mastery. And I did this because Amy sort of touched on this. It's like if a student has made really good progress, they've shown growth, but they're just like still not quite at that A level, I needed a mechanism to be able to still like give them something. I couldn't just give them 0. That didn't make any sense to me and what a grade is supposed to mean. And so I have this category where there's a partial mastery. And so it's just the data analysis project and the homework sets that determine their letter grade. The weekly reflections and those worksheets for participation just determine whether or not they'll get a plus on their letter grade, A plus, B plus, or a minus, or nothing at all. And then the last thing I'll talk about is I've also implemented a token system, which I'm never going to go back to not having a token system. I absolutely love it. They can earn tokens. They earn 3 tokens at the beginning of the quarter by completing this online learning plan. I ask them to think about things like what are your study habits, right? Do you work best in the morning, evening, afternoon? Plan some time for studying for this class. How are you going to reevaluate your study schedule throughout the quarter? Things like that. And then they just submit it to me and get their 3 tokens. I've also given them an assignment where they can do an extra reading per week. It's a reading of their choice. They can pull up any peer-reviewed primary paper that was cited in the assigned reading. And then I've shown them how to use the CREATE approach for reading peer-reviewed literature, if you're familiar with that. And so they fill out a little sheet reading through this paper they selected using the CREATE approach. And that's actually been great for me to catch up on the literature, to be perfectly honest. Like I get to quickly look through the primary literature. They use their tokens to request extensions. I don't even have to know the reason. They get an extension, life happens. But that's limited because they have limited tokens. They can use their tokens to revise and resubmit homeworks if they didn't get mastery. And they can use their tokens to revise and resubmit their proposals or reports an additional time. So they get 1 sort of free revision between the rough draft and the final draft. And then they can have an additional revision if needed and if they have enough tokens. Quickly, just some student feedback. I've had overwhelmingly positive responses. So specs grading, these are actual quotes I pulled from the teaching evaluations. Very helpful in allowing me to focus on the material and actually learn rather than just worry about my grade. Token system helped me engage more with the material and really made sure I had it nailed down. Low pressure approach to learning relieves stress, allows them to focus on mastering the important concepts, able to focus more on understanding the material, focused on doing my best work rather than my grade. So you can see that this approach really did seem to help them think about the content more than just stressing about how many points am I getting. Um, some takeaways: must build in time for draft submissions, feedback, and revision. It's critical. Love the token system, never going back. I used to use an approach that was like drop the lowest score kind of thing, but I would still get all these, sob stories all the time about, oh, this happened. Like, I don't need to know. You just use the token and you get your extension. I'll note that these data analysis projects, I have like 12 students showing up to my office hours, and we're engaging in conversations that feel more like I'm talking to a grad student than an undergraduate student. Like, they're really thinking creatively about their projects. And just another key is I've learned that developing a really well thought out rubric makes my life a lot easier. It just elevates the quality of the work the students submit, and then it also makes grading much easier. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening.